Okay, little chicken boos, here we go. Today I'm going to talk to you about different types and the origins of clay. Where does it come from? It's really exciting, interesting stuff. I think it is, at least. So if you're into science, you're going to love this little lecture. And if you're not into science, maybe this is your way to find it fascinating through art. Okay, so clay. What the heck is this stuff we've been messing around with? It's a natural resource, and it is found all over the Earth's crust, right there where we live. And I'm going to talk about where it comes from. Exciting. I talked to you about this before, but clay is made up of alumina, silica, and water. The water is what makes that bag of clay so heavy. The silica I talked about in the last video is the element that is most dangerous to breathe in its dry form. And then alumina, think of that kind of like the dirt, the dirt part of the clay. So alumina, silica, and water. Live it, learn it, know it. This pie chart is showing all of the Earth's most common oxides. And what I found exciting about this pie chart is you look at this, alumina and silica together make up a big chunk of the pie. That's almost 40% of the Earth's oxides, or the materials found on Earth, basically are the building blocks, basic building blocks of clay. And then when I look at these other oxides like iron, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, these oxides are very common additives in clay and glazes that give them their special properties like color. Iron makes things dark red and brown. And then things like magnesium makes glazes more opaque, like a white glaze, like the kind you would see on a sink or a toilet. Anyways, we're not going to get too in depth, but anywho, it's exciting. Okay, so like I said before, clay is alumina, silica, and water. In its tetrahedron form, it looks like this, these little tetrahedron little pyramids. But under the microscope, clay looks like these little platelets like this. They're like little flat hexagon. See, it's sort of like a hexagon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these little corners, 3 oops, hexagon shapes. That's clay under the microscope. Here's another picture of clay under the microscope. So all these, lots and lots of these little hexagonal platelets stack on top of each other. And when they're wet, they have these little negative charges and stuff that positive and negative charges that kind of stick them together. So here's dispersed clay, kind of whatever's, they're kind of like apart. And then as they dry, they get kind of stuck together. But another thing that's interesting about clay, when you see it under the microscope in these kind of stacks, think of it like if you took like a deck of cards out of the box and you just like put them on the table and kind of like spread them all around, and how the deck of cards kind of slide on top of each other. You can kind of like picture that in your mind. That's what the clay platelets are doing at the microscopic, teeny tiny, itty bitty level. And what that causes, and what makes clay so special and awesome, is what we call plasticity. And so it's that sliding and sticking of the platelets that causes plasticity. And plasticity, like plastic is like the little precursor word here, is the ability to stretch and hold its shape. So when we pull little handles, we're stretching them and sticking them on, or anytime when you were stretching and pinching the pinch pots, that was plasticity. And it's what makes clay awesome. Okay, great. But where does clay come from? This is a really exciting story. Where does the clay come from? I think it's, when I learned about this, I was like, this is so cool. So, okay. Clay actually begins its life in the Earth's core as liquid hot magma. lava. So it starts out as lava. But imagine you're lava down there in the Earth's belly button, and you are thinking about coming up to the Earth or whatever. And so some lava comes out, shooting out of volcanoes. That's not the kind of lava we're talking about. What happens is this lava decides it's going to take the long road, and it gets trapped underneath the Earth, kind of like on a little side chute like this one, right? So what happens is the lava takes a little left turn, it gets lost, and that's okay. And it's stuck under the Earth, and it slowly cools over millions of years. So when that lava slowly cools, it forms crystals and becomes granite rock. So we're talking about this kind of granite with the visible crystals. All right, so let's take a look-ski. All right, so you're pretty common. You know what granite looks like. You've seen it on kitchen countertops or in bathrooms and stuff, and you'll see how it kind of has like those shiny little flecks of mica in it. Like if you're ever on the beach and you look in the sand and you see that like gold in the sand, that's mica. That's like these flecks of shiny glass like micas. The other parts of granite that you'll see is called like the feldspar. Feldspar, it's sort of more like the if rocks were like wood, then feldspar is like the woody kind of part of the rock. It's like very opaque, and it might have cooled a little faster, so that's why it's not as shiny or glass-like. Then you have quartz. Quartz is another part that is in granite rock, and if you're ever on the beach, and they don't really have them here in Coronado, but if you're on a rocky beach and you find those little white rocks that are almost see-through, they're like opaque. I used to call them moonstones. I should get one for my desk. But that is quartz, and quartz is very glass-like kind of rock, okay? So granite's got all three of these kind of mixed together, the micas, the quartzes, and the feldspars, all right? And so like I said before, clay starts its life as magma and then turns into granite rock, and granite is a very, very common, one of the most common rocks you find on Earth. So going back to the beginning here, magma or lava, not this kind of lava, because this lava is on the surface, but I couldn't find, there's no pictures of lava underground. So just use your imagination. Lava underground, magma, slowly cools and becomes granite. And then somehow the granite, how does that become clay? This like gooey schmooey stuff we've been playing with. So I'm going to talk about a little bit how this turns into this. But before we get there, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different parts of how does granite become clay, like at its element, like at its bone structure and core. So that feldspar, that kind of the woody part of the rock that I was telling you that has the less opaque color and stuff, that's like the feldspar. And the feldspar is mainly made of alumina. It's kind of like the stony part of clay. And then the quartz and the micas, those kind of glassy elements in granite, they ultimately are kind of like the silica, or like the glass former in clay. So in their basic parts, they are the same, but they are different. It's so, I don't know. I find this transformation is very exciting to me. You're like, this is so boring. Get me out of here. But you're not even done yet, so just bear with me. Okay, so how does it go from granite down to clay? It takes millions more years of weathering. And so through rain, wind, snow, erosion, all these nature processes, we go from the rock to the clay. So when you think of granite, one thing I think about is Half Dome and Yosemite. This is a huge piece of granite. And an ice, is it not an iceberg? Oh my gosh, help me. It'll come to me later. But a huge chunk of ice came through this valley and cut it in half. And so ice is very, very strong and can dramatically change the landscapes. How do I? Okay, it'll come to me later in this talk of what that was. Why can't I think of it right now? Oh, you're smarter than me. You'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, then what happens is over time you start to see this kind of decomposing granite. And so this looks like the side of the road. Actually, there's some snow on the ground here. This is like kind of like when you're driving up to Big Bear and you're where they slice the earth, you know, the land in half to build the road. You kind of see these, you get to see like a cool cross section of the landscape. And decomposing granite is also really commonly used in landscaping. So they call it DG. And it's sort of like grainy, rough, sandy like granite. Other places you can see like kind of decomposing granite is on the sides of like rivers where like water is flowing by that granite and stuff, breaking it down into smaller and smaller particles. And then you might see stuff that kind of looks like this, where those particles get broken down into smaller and smaller pieces and maybe like laid down with in rivers or water. So see how this is kind of like in these horizontal pieces. This is kind of like the beginnings of clay. So it's getting broken down into teeny tiny little pieces. Now we're kind of down at the bottom of the mountain where the stream is sort of running around and flowing. And these are places where the granite is broken down into like a very fine mixture. And you could easily probably find some clay kind of deposits in these kind of areas. And it'll start to look like this. This is like river clay. It's almost slimy, kind of like very finely silted material. And then lastly, we made it all the way out to the ocean. Here's the beach. And these are other places where you would find even finer particles of sand and stuff and clay. And you can definitely, like in certain areas, find clay deposits on beaches, stuff like that. Okay. Here's an example out in the desert where some land has over time like broken down and thing. And you look down here at this lake. This is more like in the middle of the continent somewhere, and you can find clay deposits in lakes. So lakes, rivers, mountains, you can pretty much find clay everywhere. Wherever you are, you're probably pretty near a clay deposit. And look at this kid, he's stoked. You can tell this is clay because the way it is shrinking and cracking. Clay tends to, as it dries, shrink and get smaller and crack. All right, so that's where clay comes from. But let's talk about, there's actually 3 different types of clays. The first type is primary clay or porcelains, and they tend to be white like bales. Secondary clays or stonewares. They tend to be all different colors, but most commonly grays, like this kind of. And tertiary or earthenware clay, sometimes called terracotta, are much darker clays that look like this, kind of like dark browns and reds and things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these 3 types of clays that you can find out in the world. First, there's primary clays. And primary clays are most commonly, basically always called porcelains. And the reason why porcelain is white is that granite rock that it comes from has never really moved from where it began its life. And so it has almost no impurities. So that granite was formed in a location, it cooled super slowly and made a million little crystals, like lots and lots of quartz, like high quartz granite that is like pure white granite, like the fancy kind you would see in a fancy bathroom. That's going to make porcelain, and it's very smooth in texture. It's white, smooth, and typically fired to high temperatures. I'm going to kind of go on a little sidetrack just because it's really interesting. But there's this place, a mountain in Jingdezhen, China, in the interiors of China, where there's a mountain there where they've been mining porcelain for generations, for like 500 years. And it makes these pure white porcelains. And so for generations and generations, they've made perfect, beautiful porcelain. So this is what the rock, the granite, the porcelain primary clay looks like in its raw state. See how it's very light? There's no like black flecks or other colors in there. And this is going to make porcelain. This is like an ancient style of mashing up and grinding up that granite in one of the museums there, just to show like how they used to grind it into like a powder in order to make the porcelain. And then here's what it looks like after they've added water and like mixed it together to kind of like make it into like a workable form. So people figured out we could, make beautiful objects and mine this clay. It's a really fascinating, beautiful place. This is on my bucket list of like places I want to go before I die. And in places like Jingdezhen, people use the clay and they'll like form it kind of like traditionally using wheels, or they'll also use it in a slip form or like a liquid form and pour the porcelain slip into these molds, these different forms, and then make, think like the chocolate bunny at Easter time, kind of like mold made porcelain pieces. Oops. Other things I was going to mention about like these pictures from Jingdezhen is in China and in this city, everybody is very specialized in one aspect of clay. In postmodern, contemporary clay artists, we do everything from like, we get the clay, we make the thing, we glaze it, we fire it, we do all the steps. But here, people become super specialized in, like, these women are painters or decorators, and other people are people that just make the plates or just fire the kilns or just mine the porcelain. So everyone's kind of some more specialized there. This is just pictures from around Jingdezhen where, say, there was a giant load of these porcelain dishes and something went wrong where the glaze maybe didn't fit right or didn't work, and you can just see stacks and stacks of ceramics everywhere. And here's a guy taking a bunch of greenware, unfired clay, porcelain pieces to the other side of town where all the kilns are. So there's like a section of town where you have to like bring your work to get it fired. And then I don't know if you can tell back here, there's a light lamppost and it's made of porcelain. And then look, there's a little baby on a motorcycle with no helmet on. All right, sorry. I had to talk about Jingdezhen when it came to porcelain because it's fascinating. Okay, secondary clay is stoneware. This is what kind of clay we are using. It is the most common type of clay. It's really, it's just really easy to work with. Porcelain is rare, and stoneware is like the most common. It's like everywhere, it's like the most commonly found clay. It's usually rough and coarse because it has actually moved from where it began its life. So it has a little bit of impurities. So think of this way. The primary clay was formed in its birthplace and never moved. Secondary clay was formed in its birthplace and it might have moved to a secondary location. And in that move, like it rolled down a hill, you know what I'm saying? Or it got swept in a river. It might have picked up some colors or some impurities. And along its life, it became more interesting with some more color in it. Secondary clays can be found in red, yellow, black, and gray. Let's take a look at a few. So here's some examples of some stonewares. You might have lots and lots of iron in it to make it this dark red, brown. I like it when they're kind of nice and toasty and orangey like this, or even yellow. But the B mix that we're working with is gray, and it is also technically a stoneware. It has some kind of porcelain qualities in that it's smooth, but it's technically a stoneware. Other things you would notice in stonewares, when they're high fired, you see this kind of nice freckling, speckling that's really pretty. It's kind of like iron impurities tend to come through. You can see how they have these pretty little freckles. Yum, yum, yum. And here's some dark black stoneware with some other fun glaze on it. Yeah, okay. Stonewares can look like this. Like this is kind of an example of like our B mix. It's like a lighter clay body with some dark green and browns on top. Okay, yeah. All right, we're almost done. One more thing to talk about and then we out of here. Is tertiary. So the third type of clay is tertiary, also known as terracottas or earthenwares. And now earthenwares, think of them as the clay that had traveled the furthest, like down the river and almost to the beach. And so earthenwares or tertiaries have like gone all these different places, and so they've picked up lots and lots of impurities and things that make them more bright red or darker in color. So sometimes they're like bright orange or red, or even like chocolatey brown in color. They're super pretty, and they're also very finely textured, and it's because those chunks, those chunky bits have broke down into smaller itty bitty parts. So, and they tend to be lower temperature clays, and that's because all that red iron in the clay, which iron is like a basic element of like metals and things, you know, that oxide tends to melt at lower temperatures. All right, so here's some terracotta earthenware. You've seen it around as this kind of like orange pots or roof tiles. The most famous terracotta pieces in the world are the terracotta warriors, or it's very common in like Mexican and South America. Then they tend to be lower temperature fired pots and things. Okay, so that's pretty much it. You got to learn where does clay come from and the 3 different types of clay, and I hope you enjoyed this videos. Smell you laters.